The gunshots echoed through the towering pines of the Sierra Nevada foothills as Bethany Nelson clutched the reins of her startled mare, her knuckles turning white with fear. It was 1853, and the promise of California gold had brought both fortune seekers and desperados to these mountain trails outside Downieville. "Stand and deliver." The command came from a bearded man who stepped from behind a boulder, his revolver aimed squarely at Bethany's chest. Two more men emerged from the brush, their faces obscured by bandanas, their intentions clear in their hungry eyes. Bethany's heart hammered against her ribs. At 22, she had traveled alone from Boston following her father's death, determined to claim the deed to his store in Downieville. Now, 3 miles from town, her journey might end at the hands of road agents. "I have nothing of value," she called, her voice steadier than she felt. The small pouch containing her father's gold watch and her mother's wedding band was hidden in her boot, along with the crucial store deed. "That's a mighty fine horse," said the second outlaw, a tall man with a jagged scar running from his eye to his jaw. "And I reckon a pretty lady like yourself must have some valuables tucked away." The third man, shorter and wiry, circled behind her. "Maybe we should search her, Rafe." Bethany felt cold terror wash over her as the bearded leader Rafe stepped closer. "Get down from that horse, miss. Nice and easy." Her fingers tightened on the reins as she contemplated making a dash for it, knowing her chances were slim against 3 armed men. Before she could decide, the crack of a rifle shot split the air. "That's far enough." The commanding voice came from atop the ridge to her right. Bethany turned to see a lone rider silhouetted against the afternoon sun, rifle raised. He guided his chestnut stallion down the slope with expert ease, keeping his weapon trained on the outlaws. "This ain't your business, cowboy," Rafe snarled, but Bethany noticed his gun hand waver. 3 men threatening a lady on a public road. "I'm making it my business." The rider's horse pranced closer, revealing a man in his late 20s with sun-bronzed skin and eyes as sharp as the mountain hawk's. "Drop your weapons, or the next shot won't be a warning." The outlaws exchanged glances, calculating their odds. The moment stretched taut until Rafe made his decision, swinging his gun toward the newcomer. 2 shots rang out nearly simultaneously. Rafe howled, his revolver flying from his hand as a bullet grazed his arm. The scarred outlaw stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder where the cowboy's second shot had found its mark. "Like I said, drop your weapons," the cowboy repeated, his voice calm but carrying an edge of steel that brooked no argument. The third outlaw raised his hands, letting his pistol fall to the ground. "Don't shoot. We was just funning." "Funning." The cowboy's voice was cold. "Pick up your friend and get out of here. If I see you on this road again, I won't aim for shoulders." The 2 uninjured outlaws helped Rafe to his feet, backing away with murderous glares but no further resistance. They vanished into the thick forest, leaving their weapons behind in their haste. Only when they were gone did Bethany release her breath, suddenly aware she'd been holding it. Her rescuer rode forward, holstering his pistol. "Are you hurt, miss?" he asked, his voice gentling. Bethany shook her head, finding words difficult past the knot of fear in her throat. "No, thanks to you, sir. I am in your debt." He nodded, removing his hat to reveal thick dark hair. "Yates Garrison," he introduced himself. "I was hunting when I heard the commotion." "Bethany Nelson," she replied, extending a hand that trembled despite her efforts to appear composed. "I'm traveling to Downieville to claim my late father's property." Yates took her hand briefly. His palm was calloused but his touch unexpectedly gentle. "Those men might circle back once their courage returns. I'd be obliged if you'd allow me to escort you to town." Relief flooded through Bethany. "That would be most welcome, Mr. Garrison." "Just Yates, madam." He offered a slight smile that transformed his weathered face, softening the hard lines earned from years under the western sun. As they rode side by side toward Downieville, Bethany studied her rescuer from beneath her lashes. He sat his horse with the easy grace of a man born to the saddle, his lean frame suggesting strength without bulk. Though his clothing was trail-worn faded blue shirt, dusty denims, and scuffed boots, he carried himself with a quiet dignity. "Have you been in California long?" she ventured. "Since '49, he replied. "Came for gold like everyone else, stayed for different reasons." "And did you find it? Gold, I mean." A shadow crossed his features. "Found enough to know I didn't want to spend my life chasing it." The trail widened as they approached town, the rushing sound of the Yuba River growing louder. Nestled in the deep canyon where the Downy River met the North Fork of the Yuba, Downieville appeared before them, a collection of wooden buildings clinging to the steep mountainsides, bustling with activity despite its remote location. "It's changed since I was last here," Bethany murmured, taking in the transformed landscape. "My father wrote that it had grown, but I hadn't imagined this." Yates nodded. "Gold changes everything it touches. 3 years ago, this was just wilderness. Now there's near 3,000 souls here." As they rode down the main street, Bethany felt the stares of curious onlookers. A woman traveling alone was unusual enough. Arriving in the company of a man like Yates Garrison drew even more attention. "Which building is your father's?" Yates asked, seemingly oblivious to the speculative glances. "The Mercantile." Bethany pointed to a 2-story wooden structure near the center of town. "At least, that's what it was when he wrote last." They dismounted outside the store, its windows dusty but intact. A faded sign reading Nelson's General Goods hung above the door. Bethany felt a pang of grief seeing her father's name. "Looks closed," Yates observed. "How long since your father passed?" 3 months. I came as soon as I received word." Bethany reached into her boot and withdrew the small pouch. From it, she produced a folded document and a brass key. "The attorney in Sacramento confirmed the property is mine, but warned it might not be in the condition father described in his letters." Yates took the key from her outstretched hand and tried it in the lock. It turned with resistance, the door swinging inward with a protesting creak. The interior was dark and musty, shelves half empty, counters thick with dust. But unlike many abandoned buildings in mining towns, it hadn't been looted, a testament to the respect Samuel Nelson had earned in Downieville. Bethany walked slowly through the space, trailing fingers across her father's ledger still open on the counter. "He wrote that business was good," she said softly, "that he was building something for our future." "Seems he was," Yates said, removing his hat out of respect. "Folks don't leave a store untouched unless they're holding it for someone." Bethany turned, brushing away a tear. "I haven't thanked you properly for your assistance, Mr. Yates. Is there some way I might repay you?" He shook his head. "No need. Just doing what any decent man would." "Few would have risked themselves against 3 armed outlaws," she countered. "At least let me offer you a meal once I've settled." A half-smile played at the corner of his mouth. "I won't turn down a home-cooked meal, but you've got some setting up to do first." He glanced around the store. "Need any help getting this place in order?" Before Bethany could answer, the door swung open. A portly man with impressive whiskers and a shining sheriff's badge entered, followed by a younger deputy. "Heard we had a newcomer," the sheriff announced, his keen eyes taking in the scene. His gaze lingered on Yates. "And I see you've met our local hero." "Sheriff Miller," Yates acknowledged with a nod. "Miss Nelson," the sheriff inquired, turning to Bethany, "we've been expecting you since we got word from Sacramento about Sam's will." "Yes, I'm Bethany Nelson." She extended her hand. You knew my father. Everyone knew Sam, Miller said, his expression softening. Finest man in Downieville, gave folks credit when times were tough, never gouged prices during shortages. He gestured to the store around them. Town's been keeping an eye on the place for you. Some of the ladies even come by to dust every few weeks. Bethany felt a surge of gratitude. That's very kind. Sam would have done the same for any of us, Miller replied. Now I hear there was trouble on the road. Yates stepped forward. 3 men tried to rob Miss Nelson about 3 miles east. I interrupted before they could do any harm. The sheriff's bushy eyebrows drew together. Description. As Yates detailed the encounter, Bethany noticed the way the lawman listened with respect. Clearly, her rescuer carried weight in this community. Sounds like the Halloran gang, the deputy offered. They've been hitting travelers between here and Nevada City. Sheriff Miller nodded grimly. We'll send a patrol out, though they're likely long gone by now. He turned to Bethany. Your lucky Garrison happened along, miss. Not many would stand against those 3 alone. After the lawman departed, promising to check back later, Bethany found herself alone with Yates in the dusty store. The sheriff seems to think highly of you, she observed. Yates shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. I've helped track outlaws a few times. Know the mountain trails better than most. And what is it you do when you're not rescuing damsels in distress? She asked, attempting levity to mask her growing awareness of him. I've got a small spread about 5 miles west of town. Nothing fancy, some cattle, couple horses I break for the stage company. He moved toward the door. I should let you get settled. There's a boarding house run by Widow Chen if you need somewhere to stay tonight. Store's living quarters probably need airing out. Bethany felt a sudden reluctance to see him leave. Thank you again, Yates. I mean it about that meal. He paused at the door, hat in hand. I'll hold you to that, Miss Nelson. Bethany, she corrected. After all we've been through, I think we can dispense with formalities. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or pleasure. Bethany, he repeated, as if testing the feel of her name. I'll come by tomorrow to see how you're faring, if that's acceptable. After he left, Bethany stood in the center of her father's store, heart beating with an unfamiliar rhythm. The day had brought terror and rescue, grief and new beginnings. And Yates Garrison a man who seemed as complex as the mountains surrounding them. With renewed determination, she rolled up her sleeves and began the work of reclaiming her father's legacy. The following morning dawned clear and cool, sunlight streaming through gaps in the shutters of the small apartment above the store. Bethany had spent hours the previous evening cleaning the living quarters, sweeping floors, beating dust from bedding, and scrubbing away the evidence of months of emptiness. She had discovered her father's personal effects largely untouched. His favorite pipe still on the mantel, a half-empty bottle of whiskey in the cabinet, and most precious of all, a daguerreotype of her mother that he had carried west. These small tokens of his life brought both comfort and fresh grief. After washing and dressing in a simple blue calico, Bethany ventured downstairs to assess the store in daylight. The inventory would need replenishing, dust removed from every surface, and accounts reviewed to understand the business's standing. But before she could begin, a knock at the door interrupted her planning. "Store's not open yet," she called, assuming it was an eager customer. "It's Martha Chen," came the reply. "Brought you some breakfast, dearie." Bethany opened the door to find a stout Chinese woman in her 50s, holding a covered basket. Behind her stood 2 younger women carrying brooms and cleaning supplies. "You must be Samuel's daughter," Martha said, bustling in without waiting for an invitation. "Sheriff told me you arrived yesterday. Thought you could use a proper meal and some help getting this place in order." Overwhelmed by the unexpected assistance, Bethany could only nod gratefully as the women set to work. Martha uncovered the basket to reveal still warm biscuits, ham, and a jar of preserves. "Eat," she instructed. "We'll handle this. My husband and I run the Golden Dragon boarding house down the street. Your father was kind to us when others weren't. This is little enough to repay." As Bethany ate the delicious food, Martha explained how Samuel Nelson had extended credit to Chinese miners when other merchants refused, and had stood against the anti-foreign sentiment that sometimes flared in the mining camps. "He was a good man," Martha concluded. "Said he had a daughter back east who was just as fair-minded. That would be you." The morning passed in a flurry of activity as more townspeople arrived to help. Men from the lumberyard fixed loose boards and repaired the sagging back steps. Women scrubbed shelves and floors until they gleamed. By noon, the store looked ready for business, though the inventory remained sparse. "We've got a supply wagon coming from Sacramento next week," offered Harold Winters, the town blacksmith. "I can add your order to it if you've got a list." "Thank you," Bethany said, touched by the community's support. "I'll need to review the ledgers first to see what sold best." As the helpers departed, Martha paused at the door. "Nearly forgot. That cowboy of yours stopped by the boarding house asking after you. Told him you were getting settled here." "He's not my cowboy," Bethany protested, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. Martha's knowing smile suggested she wasn't convinced. "He's a good man, too, that Yates Garrison. Keeps to himself mostly, but always ready to help when needed. Brave as they come." Left alone, Bethany turned her attention to her father's account books. The neat columns revealed a profitable business that had served the community well. Notes in the margins showed which miners had paid their debts and which still owed, with no apparent distinction based on nationality or background. She was so absorbed in her father's meticulous records that she didn't hear the door open. Only when a shadow fell across the ledger did she look up to find Yates standing before the counter, hat in hand. "Pardon the intrusion," he said. Door was unlatched. Bethany quickly stood, suddenly conscious of her disheveled appearance after hours of cleaning. "Not at all. I was just reviewing the accounts." Yates glanced around the transformed store. "Place looks different. The townspeople have been incredibly kind," she explained. "They've been helping all morning. Your father made an impression." He set a small cloth-wrapped package on the counter. "Brought you something. Venison steaks. Thought you might not have had time to stock your larder." The gesture, practical yet thoughtful, touched Bethany deeply. "That's very considerate. Would you care to share them? I've been promising you a meal after all." Uncertainty flickered across his face. "Wouldn't want to impose." "It's no imposition," she assured him. "In fact, I'd welcome the company, and I have questions about Downieville that perhaps you could answer." After a moment's hesitation, he nodded. "All right. Need any help preparing it?" Together they climbed the stairs to the apartment where Bethany set about lighting the stove and preparing the meal. Yates moved with surprising comfort in the domestic setting, slicing potatoes she had found in the root cellar and offering to brew coffee. "Have you lived in Downieville all these years?" she asked as they worked. "Most of them," he replied. "Tried my hand at mining when I first arrived, made enough to buy some land, decided I preferred raising cattle to digging in the dirt." "And your family, are they here as well?" A shadow crossed his face. "Lost my parents to cholera in Missouri. Came west with my younger brother Tyler. Yates paused, his hand stilling. "He died in '51, mining accident." "I'm sorry," Bethany said softly, recognizing the familiar pain of loss. "It's difficult being alone." Their eyes met in shared understanding, and something shifted between them, a recognition of kindred spirits. The meal was simple but satisfying, seasoned with increasingly easy conversation. Bethany shared stories of her childhood in Boston, her father's decision to seek his fortune in California, and her determination to continue what he had started. "I could have sold the store from afar," she admitted, "but that felt like betraying his dream. And after my mother passed 2 years ago, there was nothing keeping me in Boston." "It takes courage to travel so far alone," Yates observed. "Most women would have sought a husband's protection first." Bethany met his gaze squarely. "I've never been most women, Mr. Garrison." A slow smile spread across his face. "I gathered that when you didn't swoon after being accosted by outlaws." Their laughter eased any remaining tension, and as dusk fell, Yates reluctantly rose to leave. "I should get back to my place before full dark. Mountain lions have been coming down near the trails lately." At the door, he paused. "There's a social at the church on Saturday. Might be a good way for you to meet more of the town." "Are you inviting me, Yates?" Bethany asked, surprising herself with her boldness. His eyes crinkled at the corners. "I believe I am, Miss Nelson." "Then I accept," she said, her heart inexplicably light after he left. Bethany stood at the window watching his tall figure move down the street toward where his horse was hitched. An unexpected warmth had taken root within her, not merely gratitude toward a rescuer, but something more complex and potentially dangerous. "Be careful, Bethany," she whispered to herself. "You came to Downieville for your father's store, not to lose your heart to a cowboy." Yet as she prepared for bed, she found herself anticipating Saturday with an eagerness that had nothing to do with meeting the townspeople, and everything to do with the man who had invited her. The days that followed settled into a rhythm as Bethany worked to revitalize Nelson's General Goods. Word spread quickly that Samuel Nelson's daughter had returned to reopen the store, and customers began appearing, some to shop, others simply to satisfy their curiosity about the Eastern lady who had traveled alone to the Gold Country. She learned that Downieville had changed significantly since its founding just a few years earlier. What had begun as a rough mining camp called the Forks had evolved into a proper town with a courthouse, several hotels, and even a small theater. Though gold remained the economic lifeblood, more families had arrived, bringing civilization's comforts and constraints. Throughout the week, Bethany caught glimpses of Yates around town consulting with the blacksmith, delivering a calf for a Mexican family at the edge of town, helping the widow Peterson repair her leaking roof. Each sighting confirmed Martha Chen's assessment. He was indeed always ready to help when needed. Sometimes he would stop by the store, ostensibly to check if she required assistance, but their conversations increasingly strayed from practical matters to personal histories and beliefs. Bethany found herself looking forward to these visits, arranging her work to ensure she wasn't too disheveled when he might appear. By Saturday, she had restored enough order to the store to justify closing early to prepare for the social. After much deliberation, she chose her best dress, a sage green poplin with modest lace trim, and arranged her chestnut hair in a simple but elegant style. The looking glass reflected a woman transformed from the trail-weary traveler who had arrived in Downieville, her eyes brighter, her complexion warmed by the mountain sun, her bearing more confident. A knock at the store's front door announced Yates's arrival. When Bethany opened it, she was momentarily taken aback. Gone was the trail-worn cowboy. In his place stood a handsome gentleman in a clean black coat, crisp white shirt, and polished boots. He had even trimmed his beard, revealing more of the strong jaw beneath. "You look beautiful," he said with simple directness that brought heat to her cheeks. "And you clean up remarkably well, sir," she replied, accepting his proffered arm. The church hall buzzed with conversation when they arrived, but a hush fell as they entered together. Bethany felt the weight of curious stares, Understanding immediately that her appearance with Yates Garrison was significant in ways she hadn't anticipated, Sheriff Miller approached, breaking the momentary silence. "Miss Nelson, glad you could join us." And Garrison didn't recognize you without a layer of trail dust. The sheriff's jovial greeting eased the tension, and soon Bethany found herself introduced to what seemed like half the town. Women who had helped clean the store introduced their husbands and children. Miners who had traded with her father shared stories of his fairness and generosity. Through it all, Yates remained at her side, a steady presence in the swirl of new faces and names. When the small band struck up a waltz, Yates turned to her. "Would you do me the honor, Bethany?" Dancing had been one of the few social graces Bethany had truly enjoyed in Boston, but she hadn't expected to find such refinement in a mining town. "With pleasure," she replied, placing her hand in his. As he led her onto the floor, she noticed several people nudging each other and whispering. "We seem to be causing a stir," she murmured. Yates's hand was warm at her waist as they began to move with the music. "It's not often I attend these gatherings," he explained, "and never with a lady." "Never?" she asked, surprised. A shadow crossed his features. "After Tyler died, I kept to myself mostly. Didn't see much point in socializing. And now," she held her breath, waiting for his answer. His eyes, usually guarded, met hers with unexpected openness. "Now I found a reason to reconsider." The simple declaration sent her heart racing faster than the dance steps warranted. They completed the waltz in charged silence, each aware that something fundamental had shifted between them. As the evening progressed, Bethany observed Yates with new awareness. Though quiet by nature, he showed unexpected wit when conversing with friends. Children approached him without fear, suggesting he was a familiar and welcome presence in their lives despite his reputation as a loner. Even the town's Chinese residents, often relegated to the margins of social gatherings, exchanged respectful greetings with him. "You're well respected here," she noted as they shared cake and coffee. Yates shrugged, uncomfortable with the observation. "I try to judge folks by their actions, not where they come from. Learned that from my pa, a wise man he was." Yates's expression grew distant. "Always said the measure of a community was how it treated those with the least power." He nodded toward where Martha Chen was organizing the refreshments. "Folks like the Chens have faced plenty of prejudice, but they've worked harder than most to build something here." Before Bethany could respond, a commotion at the door drew everyone's attention. 3 rough-looking men entered, bringing the scent of whiskey and trail dust with them. The music faltered as recognition spread through the gathering. "Trouble," Yates muttered, setting down his coffee cup and moving subtly to place himself between Bethany and the newcomers. Sheriff Miller approached the men, his hand resting casually near his holster. "Evening, gentlemen. Don't recall inviting you to our social." The tallest of the 3, a man with a face like weathered leather, sneered. "Public gathering, ain't it? Thought we'd join the festivities." Bethany felt a chill as she recognized the voice. The scarred outlaw from the road. "Your kind of festivities aren't welcome here, Halloran," Miller replied evenly. "Suggest you take your business elsewhere tonight." The man's gaze swept the room, stopping when it reached Bethany and Yates. His eyes narrowed with recognition. "Well, well, if it ain't the hero Cowboy and his fancy lady." Yates stepped forward, his posture relaxed but alert. "You're heeled up, I see. Shoulder giving you any trouble?" Halloran's hand moved instinctively to his shoulder, then dropped. "Not enough to stop me from settling scores." "Not here, not now," Sheriff Miller interjected firmly. "You boys turn around and head back to whatever hole you crawled out of, or spend the night in my jail. Your choice." For a tense moment, it seemed the outlaws might challenge the sheriff. Then Halloran spat on the wooden floor. "Another time, cowboy, when you ain't hiding behind a badge." "I'm not hard to find," Yates replied calmly. The outlaws backed out the door, Halloran's eyes promising future retribution. As conversation slowly resumed, Bethany grasped Yates's arm. "Those were the men from the road." He nodded grimly. "Ethan Halloran and his cousins. They've been troubling these parts for months." "He threatened you," she said, concern evident in her voice. "It's not the first time." Yates covered her hand with his own. "Don't worry. They're all bluster when they're sober, dangerous only when drunk or in ambush." Sheriff Miller joined them, his expression troubled. "Sorry about that, Miss Nelson. Hallorans like to make their presence known now and then." He turned to Yates. "Might want to watch your back trail for a while, Garrison. Ethan doesn't forget grudges." "Never does," Yates agreed. "But I've got a good dog at my place and sleep light." Despite efforts to recapture the evening's earlier gaiety, the mood had shifted. Families with children began departing, casting nervous glances at the door. When the band packed away their instruments, Yates offered to escort Bethany home. The night air had cooled considerably as they walked the short distance to the store, their breath forming small clouds in the moonlight. "I'm sorry the evening ended on such a sour note," Yates said as they reached her door. "It's hardly your fault," Bethany replied, "though I confess I'm troubled that you've made enemies on my behalf." He stepped closer, his voice low and intense. "I'd do it again in a heartbeat." The moonlight silvered his features, highlighting the earnest expression that made her heart quicken. Without conscious thought, Bethany raised a hand to his cheek, feeling the contrast of smooth skin and trimmed beard beneath her fingers. Yates caught her hand, holding it against his face for a moment before gently lowering it, though he didn't release it. "Bethany," he began, then hesitated. "I'm not a man of fancy words, but I'd like permission to call on you properly. Not just as a friend or neighbor, but as a man who finds himself thinking about you far more than is probably sensible." His direct approach, devoid of artifice or practiced charm, touched Bethany deeply. In Boston, suitors had approached with calculated strategies and veiled intentions. Yates offered only honest sentiment, leaving himself vulnerable in a way those polished gentlemen never had. "I'd like that very much," she answered softly. The smile that transformed his face was worth any risk the future might hold. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to withdraw, he leaned down and brushed his lips against hers, a kiss so gentle it was almost reverent. "Good night, Bethany Nelson," he whispered, stepping back. "Lock your door behind you. I'll check the alley before I leave." She watched from the window as he circled the building, inspecting shadows with careful attention before mounting his horse. Only when he disappeared down the street did she realize she was touching her fingers to her lips, holding the memory of that brief, perfect moment. The following weeks brought a deepening of their connection, as Yates began courting Bethany with the same quiet determination he brought to all his endeavors. Their backgrounds could hardly have been more different. She raised in Boston's refined society. He largely self-educated on the frontier, yet they found common ground in their love of literature, their practical approach to life's challenges, and their shared belief in treating all people with dignity. Bethany threw herself into revitalizing the store, implementing improvements that honored her father's legacy while reflecting her own vision. She extended credit to minors regardless of origin, stocked goods that catered to the diverse community, and even set aside a small section for books and periodicals that quickly became a gathering place for those hungry for news and stories from beyond the mountains. Yates divided his time between his small ranch and town, often arriving with practical gifts: fresh meat, a repaired lantern, a cleverly designed shelf for her growing book collection. They took meals together frequently, sometimes at the store, occasionally at the ranch, where Bethany was charmed by the simple but comfortable cabin he had built with his own hands. As autumn painted the mountains in flaming colors, their kisses grew longer, their embraces more difficult to end. Though neither spoke of marriage yet, the trajectory of their relationship was clear to everyone in Downieville. "You've brought life back to that boy," Martha Chen remarked one afternoon as she helped Bethany inventory a new shipment of fabric. "Before you came, he was just existing, not living. Now he smiles." Bethany blushed at the observation. "He's brought much to my life as well." Martha nodded sagely. "Good match, both strong, both kind where it matters." She sorted bolts of calico with practiced efficiency. "But be careful. Halloran gang still nursing their grudge. Been asking questions about Garrison's comings and goings." The warning sent a chill through Bethany. Though there had been no further confrontation since the church social, she occasionally felt watched when walking alone in town. Yates had taken to carrying his rifle more visibly when riding between his ranch and Downieville, a precaution that spoke volumes about the threat he perceived. One crisp October morning, Bethany was preparing the store for opening when Sheriff Miller appeared at her door, his expression grave. "Miss Nelson," he began, twisting his hat in his hands. "There's been trouble," her heart seized. "Yates, he's alive," Miller assured her quickly. "But his place was hit last night. Barn burned, livestock scattered. Found his ranch hand tied up in the root cellar. Says it was the Hallorans, 4 of them. And Yates," she demanded, already reaching for her shawl, "wasn't there when it happened. He was tracking a mountain lion that had been taking calves." Miller blocked her path gently. "He's up at his place now, assessing the damage. Ask me to tell you he's fine and not to worry." "Not to worry," Bethany's voice rose. "Sheriff, those men could have killed him if he'd been home." "That was likely their intention," Miller acknowledged grimly. "This goes beyond ordinary outlaw mischief. It's personal now." "I need to go to him," she insisted. The sheriff sighed, recognizing the determination in her eyes. "I figured you'd say that. Got a deputy outside ready to escort you. But Bethany," he added, using her given name for the first time, "this situation's getting dangerous. The Hallorans don't draw lines between their targets and those their targets care about." The implications were clear, but Bethany's resolve didn't waver. "I understand the risk, Sheriff, but I won't hide while Yates faces this alone." The ride to Yates's ranch was tense, the deputy scanning the tree line constantly for any sign of ambush. As they crested the final ridge, Bethany gasped at the scene below. The barn was a charred skeleton, wisps of smoke still rising from the blackened timbers. The corral fencing had been smashed, and the carefully tended garden trampled. Yates emerged from his cabin at the sound of their approach, rifle in hand until he recognized them. Even from a distance, Bethany could see the exhaustion etched in his features, the smudges of soot on his clothing. She dismounted before the horse fully stopped, rushing to him with uncharacteristic abandon. His arms closed around her tightly, his face buried in her hair. "You shouldn't have come," he murmured, though his embrace belied his words. "It's not safe." "As if I could stay away," she replied fiercely. Drawing back to examine him, she noted a gash on his temple. "You're hurt." "It's nothing. Got it rounding up what cattle I could find." He glanced at the deputy. "Any sign of them on the road?" "None, sir." "But that doesn't mean they're not watching." Yates nodded grimly. "Joe Mason's getting the worst of his burns tended in town. They worked him over pretty good before setting fire to the barn." His jaw tightened. "I should have been here." "They might have killed you," Bethany said, her voice breaking at the thought. "Maybe, or maybe I could have prevented this." He gestured at the destruction. 3 years of work gone in one night." The deputy cleared his throat. Sheriff's organizing a posse. Says if you're up for tracking, they could use your skills. A dangerous light kindled in Yates's eyes. I'll be ready within the hour. Yates, no, Bethany protested. Let the law handle this. The law's asking for my help, he countered. I know these mountains better than most, and I have personal cause to see the Hallorans brought in. His expression softened as he looked at her. I need to do this, Bethany. They won't stop otherwise. She recognized the immovable determination in his stance. This was the man who had faced 3 armed outlaws alone to protect a stranger. He would do no less to defend what was his. Then promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you'll come back. His kiss was answer and oath combined, fierce yet tender. I'll come back to you. Always. The deputy tactfully inspected the far side of the burned barn, giving them a moment's privacy. I love you, Bethany whispered against Yates's lips, the words slipping out before she could consider their wisdom. I need you to know that before you go. Yates drew back slightly, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that stole her breath. I've loved you since I saw you facing down those outlaws without flinching, he confessed. Just been waiting for the right moment to tell you. This is hardly the romantic scene I imagined, she said with a watery smile, gesturing to the destruction around them. His answering smile held a trace of his usual quiet humor. We seem to have a knack for dramatic timing. The deputy's return ended their private moment. We should get back to town, Miss Nelson. Sheriff wants everyone accounted for until this is resolved. Bethany nodded reluctantly. How long will the tracking take? Depends on the trail and weather, Yates replied. Could be days. I'll look after things here while you're gone, she promised. Start rebuilding what can't wait. He shook his head firmly. No, you stay in town where it's safer. My neighbor Thompson will check on the remaining stock. His expression brooked no argument. Please, Bethany, I can't focus on tracking if I'm worried about you out here alone. Though it chafed against her independent nature, she recognized the logic of his request. Very well. But the moment you return, the moment I return, we'll start rebuilding together, he finished, his emphasis on the last word carrying deeper meaning. Their parting was brief but intense, each aware that circumstances had accelerated the natural progression of their relationship. What might have evolved over months of careful courtship had been crystallized in crisis, revealing feelings too powerful to deny or delay. The return journey to Downieville seemed longer, each bend in the trail offering potential danger. Bethany's mind churned with worry for Yates and anger at the men who had targeted him simply for standing against their lawlessness. Word of the attack spread quickly through town, and by afternoon, a steady stream of visitors arrived at the store offering support. Ranchers promised calves to help rebuild Yates's herd. The blacksmith volunteered tools and labor for reconstructing the barn. Women brought food and practical supplies that could be sent to the ranch once it was safe. Yates helped most everyone in this town at some point, explained Harold Winters as he dropped off a box of nails and hinges. Time we returned the favor. Martha Chen was more direct. You marry that man, yes. He needs good wife, you need good husband, simple. Despite the circumstances, Bethany found herself smiling at the matchmaking. If he asks me, Martha, I won't say no. 3 days passed with agonizing slowness. Bethany kept the store open, finding that work provided some distraction from constant worry. Each time the door opened, her heart leaped with hope that it might be Yates returning, only to be disappointed. On the 4th morning, just as she was arranging a display of winter gloves, the door burst open. Sheriff Miller entered, supporting a limping, blood-spattered Yates. Bethany dropped the merchandise, rushing to help. What happened? Is he just a bullet graze and exhaustion? Miller assured her as they guided Yates to a chair. Stubborn fool wouldn't rest until we got back to town. Yates managed a weak smile. Told you I'd come back. Bethany's relief at seeing him alive warred with horror at his condition. His clothing was torn and filthy. A crude bandage encircled his thigh, and several days' worth of beard shadowed his hollow cheeks. But his eyes were clear and focused intently on her face. "The Hallorans?" she asked, already gathering clean cloths and her medical supplies. "Two dead, two captured," the sheriff answered while Bethany knelt to examine Yates's leg wound. "Garrison here tracked them into the high country. They ambushed the posse near Eagle Creek. Ethan and his younger cousin won't trouble anyone again. The other two are in my jail awaiting the circuit judge." Yates winced as Bethany carefully removed the soiled bandage. "Would have preferred bringing them all in alive, but they didn't give us much choice." The bullet had carved a deep furrow along his outer thigh, missing bone but leaving an angry wound that had been roughly field-dressed. Bethany worked efficiently to clean and properly bandage it, her nursing skills honed during the war years in Boston. "You need rest and proper food," she declared when she finished. "Sheriff, can you help me get him upstairs to my father's bed?" Miller raised an eyebrow at the potentially compromising suggestion, but nodded. "Under the circumstances, I reckon propriety takes second place to practical care." Together they managed to get Yates up the narrow stairs and settled in the small bedroom. Once the sheriff departed, promising to return later with the doctor, Bethany sat on the edge of the bed, taking Yates's hand in hers. "You had me terrified," she admitted softly. 4 days without word." "Couldn't risk sending a messenger," he explained, his voice rough with fatigue. "Hallorans knew these mountains almost as well as I do, had to be careful." He squeezed her fingers weakly. "Kept thinking about you, about that promise." Bethany leaned forward to brush a gentle kiss across his cracked lips. "Rest now. We can talk when you're stronger." But Yates shook his head stubbornly, struggling to sit up despite her protests. "Need to say this while I've got the courage." His eyes held hers with burning intensity. "Facing those men, not knowing if I'd make it back. It clarified things. Life's uncertain out here, Bethany. I don't want to waste whatever time we've got." Her breath caught as she recognized the direction of his words. "Yates, marry me," he interrupted, the words emerging in a rush. "Not because of what happened, but because I love you and can't imagine my life without you in it." Joy bloomed within her, bright and overwhelming. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Yates Garrison, I'll marry you." His smile transformed his weary face as he pulled her closer for a deeper, though still gentle, kiss. When they parted, he pressed his forehead to hers. "Don't have a ring yet. Haven't done any of this properly." "We'll worry about proper later," she assured him. "For now, you need to heal." As if the proposal had drained his remaining strength, Yates sank back against the pillows, his eyelids drooping. "Stay with me," he murmured, already drifting toward sleep. "Always," Bethany promised, settling into the chair beside the bed, his hand still clasped in hers. She watched as exhaustion claimed him, his breathing deepening into the rhythm of healing sleep. Outside, Downieville continued its daily bustle, unaware that within the walls of Nelson's General Goods, a new chapter was beginning, one born from danger and courage, but promising a future built on something far stronger than the gold that had drawn them both to this wild, beautiful place. The winter of 1853-1854 arrived early in the Sierra Nevada, blanketing Downieville in snow before November's end. For Bethany and Yates, the season brought healing and preparations for both rebuilding and their future together. As Yates recovered from his wound, he stayed in the small apartment above the store, his presence raising eyebrows but generating surprisingly little scandal. The circumstances of his injury, combined with Martha Chen's vocal support and Sheriff Miller's tacit approval, granted them a degree of social latitude uncommon in more established communities. "Frontier practicality," Martha declared when Bethany expressed concern about potential gossip. "Man nearly died protecting town from outlaws. Nobody begrudges him proper nursing." Still, they maintained separate sleeping arrangements, with Yates occupying the bedroom while Bethany made do with a makeshift bed in the small sitting room. Their engagement was announced officially once Yates could stand without assistance, marked by a simple dinner with their closest friends in Downieville. December brought heavy snows that made travel to Yates's ranch difficult, but not impossible. On clearer days, they would ride out together to continue the slow work of rebuilding. The barn frame was raised with the help of neighbors before the worst weather set in, providing basic shelter for the remaining livestock. The cabin, largely untouched by the Halloran's attack, required only minor repairs. During one such visit in mid-December, as they stood surveying the progress, Yates wrapped his arm around Bethany's shoulders. "What do you think? Will it suit you?" She leaned into his warmth, considering the small ranch spread before them. "It's beautiful, Yates, but what about the store? My father built that business for me. I thought perhaps we could manage both," he suggested. "The ranch provides a good living, but having the store gives us security if cattle prices fall or drought hits, and you've made it thrive in just a few months." His willingness to incorporate her independent business into their shared future, rather than expecting her to abandon it, touched Bethany deeply. So many men would have demanded she choose between her inheritance and marriage. "We could hire someone to help at the store," she mused, warming to the idea. "Perhaps that young Adams boy who's always hanging around wanting work. And Joe Mason has agreed to stay on as ranch hand once he's fully recovered," Yates added. "With the Halloran threat gone, this place can be prosperous again." They had not spoken much of the Hallorans since Yates's return. The two surviving gang members had been tried swiftly by the circuit judge and sentenced to 10 years in prison. With their leaders dead and the remaining members incarcerated, the shadow that had hung over their courtship had dissipated, leaving them free to plan their future. Christmas brought a rare gift, a silver ring set with a small but perfectly clear diamond that Yates had ordered from Sacramento. "It was my mother's," he explained as he slid it onto Bethany's finger before the store's fireplace on Christmas Eve. "Sent to my uncle for safekeeping years ago. Took some doing to get it here with the mountain passes nearly closed." Bethany admired the delicate craftsmanship, the way the facets caught and reflected the firelight. "It's perfect," she whispered, sealing the moment with a kiss that quickly deepened. When they finally separated, both breathless, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "3 more weeks," he murmured, referring to their wedding date set for mid-January. "Seems like forever." "Worth waiting for," she reminded him with a smile, though she felt the same impatience. The wedding preparations occupied much of their attention as the new year dawned. Despite the winter conditions, Downieville's residents embraced the celebration with enthusiasm. The church was scrubbed until it gleamed, decorated with evergreen boughs and ribbons. Women collaborated on a wedding feast that would showcase the best of what was available in the isolated mountain town during winter. Men constructed additional tables and benches to accommodate the unexpectedly large guest list. "Half the county's coming," Sheriff Miller remarked with amused exasperation as he reviewed the security arrangements with Yates. "Going to need extra deputies just to manage the horses and wagons." On the morning of January 15, 1854, Bethany woke to softly falling snow and a sense of absolute certainty. This day, this man, This life they were building together, it was right in a way that transcended her previous understanding of the word. Martha Chen and several other women arrived early to help her prepare, bringing with them a wedding gift, a gown of ivory silk that they had secretly ordered from San Francisco and altered to fit her perfectly. "We couldn't let Samuel Nelson's daughter marry in anything less," explained Widow Peterson as Bethany ran reverent fingers over the exquisite fabric. The women fussed over her hair, arranging it in an elegant style, adorned with small white flowers preserved from the last days of autumn. When at last she stood before the mirror, Bethany hardly recognized the radiant woman reflected there. Her journey west had transformed her in ways that went beyond the physical. She was stronger now, more confident, tempered by challenges and brightened by genuine love. The church bells rang out at noon, calling the community to witness the joining of two lives that had become integral to Downieville's fabric. Yates waited at the altar, his usual outdoor attire replaced by a formal black suit that emphasized his height and the breadth of his shoulders. His face, freshly shaved and framed by neatly trimmed hair, showed a vulnerability that few had ever glimpsed, a mixture of awe, love, and barely contained joy as Bethany walked toward him on Sheriff Miller's arm. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, exchanged in voices steady with conviction. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Yates's kiss held the perfect balance of public propriety and private promise, drawing appreciative murmurs from the assembled guests. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening, with music, dancing, and enough food to suggest that Downieville was far from the isolated outpost it appeared on maps. Chinese lanterns hung alongside traditional decorations, miners danced with shopkeepers' wives, and children darted between tables laden with gifts and good wishes. As the festivities wound down, Yates drew Bethany aside, his expression both tender and mischievous. "Time to go home, Mrs. Garrison." The title, used for the first time, sent a pleasant shiver through her. "Home to the store?" she asked, knowing the ranch was likely inaccessible after the day's snowfall. He shook his head. "I've arranged something special. Trust me." Of course she did, with her life, her future, her heart. She nodded, and he led her outside where a sleigh waited, hitched to his strongest horse and piled with furs against the cold. They bid farewell to their friends amid cheers and well wishes, then set off through the snow-covered streets of Downieville. But instead of turning toward the store as Bethany expected, Yates guided the horse toward the edge of town and up a less traveled path that wound into the foothills. "Where are we going?" she asked, curious rather than concerned. His smile was visible even in the gathering dusk. "Patience, wife." The endearment warmed her more effectively than the furs as they continued their journey through the winter landscape. After perhaps 20 minutes, they crested a small ridge, revealing a sight that stole Bethany's breath: a small but sturdy cabin nestled among pine trees, windows glowing with welcoming light, smoke curling from the chimney. "What is this place?" she asked as Yates halted the sleigh. "Wedding gift from the town," he explained, helping her down. "Thompson's old hunting cabin. They've been fixing it up in secret for weeks, close enough to town for convenience, private enough for—" His voice trailed off, but the heat in his eyes completed the thought. Inside, the single-room cabin had been transformed into a haven of comfort. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, casting golden light over simple but well-crafted furniture. Shelves held provisions for several days, and the bed, larger than any Bethany had seen since leaving Boston, was piled with quilts and soft blankets. "It's perfect," she whispered, turning to find Yates watching her with an expression that made her heart race. "You're perfect," he corrected, closing the distance between them. His hands cradled her face with infinite gentleness. "I never thought I'd find this kind of happiness again after Tyler died. Didn't think I deserved it." Bethany leaned into his touch. "We've both lost too much to waste the second chance we've been given." Their kiss began tenderly, but quickly ignited into something more urgent, months of restrained desire finding release at last. Yates's hands trembled slightly as he helped her out of her wedding gown, his reverence for both the garment and what it represented evident in his careful movements. "I've never seen anything so beautiful as you in that dress," he confessed. "Except, perhaps, you out of it." His words, so unlike his usual reserve, sent heat flooding through Bethany. She reached for him with newfound boldness, helping him shed the formal attire that had constrained him all day. Together, they discovered the language of touch and taste, learning each other's bodies with the same patience and attention they had given to learning each other's hearts. Later, as they lay entwined beneath the quilts, the fire's light playing across their skin, Bethany traced the scar on Yates's thigh, the mark of his battle with the Hallorans. "You could have died," she murmured, still haunted by how close she had come to losing him before their life together had truly begun. He captured her hand, bringing it to his lips. "But I didn't. And neither did you on that road months ago. Maybe we were meant to find each other." The thought comforted her as she settled against his chest, listening to the strong, steady rhythm of his heart. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing their sanctuary in hushed white. Inside, warmth and love created a different kind of shelter, one built not of logs and stone, but of shared dreams and promises kept. Spring arrived in the Sierra Nevada with explosive energy, as if the land were eager to shed winter's constraints. Streams swollen with snowmelt thundered down mountain slopes. Wildflowers carpeted meadows in riotous color, and the forests echoed with the songs of returning birds. For Bethany and Yates, the changing season brought a similar renewal. Their first months of marriage had established rhythms that honored both their individual strengths and their partnership. Weekdays found Bethany managing the store, which had expanded to include a small lending library and regular shipments of newspapers from Sacramento and San Francisco. Yates divided his time between the ranch and various projects in town, his skills as a tracker and outdoorsman increasingly in demand as the mining operations pushed deeper into the mountains. Weekends they spent together, sometimes at the ranch continuing the rebuilding process, sometimes exploring the breathtaking landscape that surrounded Downieville. Yates took obvious pleasure in introducing Bethany to the hidden wonders of the Sierra crystal-clear alpine lakes, meadows where deer grazed unafraid, overlooks that offered views stretching all the way to the distant Sacramento Valley. "I never imagined such beauty existed," Bethany remarked one May afternoon as they picnicked beside a waterfall that plunged from granite heights into a perfect pool below. "Boston has its charms, but nothing like this." Yates smiled, watching her rather than the scenery. "Do you miss it?" "The city, I mean." She considered the question honestly. "I miss certain conveniences, ready access to books, theaters, concerts, and occasionally I miss my friends." She moved closer, resting her head against his shoulder. "But no, I don't truly miss Boston. Everything that matters most to me is here." His arm tightened around her waist. "Even with all the hardships, the isolation in winter, the rough edges of a mining town, especially with those things," she assured him. "They've helped me discover strengths I never knew I possessed." She turned to face him fully. "Why these questions, Yates? Are you worried I'm unhappy?" "Not worried," he said quickly. "Just, sometimes I look at you and can hardly believe you chose this life, chose me." Bethany's heart melted at the lingering insecurity revealed in his words. For all his outward confidence, part of Yates still saw himself as the grieving loner who had withdrawn from life after his brother's death. "I have never made a better choice," she said firmly, sealing her declaration with a kiss that left no room for doubt. Their passion had only deepened with time and familiarity. What had begun as eager exploration had matured into a profound physical connection that mirrored their emotional bond. Sometimes their lovemaking was playful and lighthearted. Other times, like now, it carried an intensity that left them both breathless and wondering at the power of what they had found together. Afterward, lying on their blanket with the waterfall's mist cooling their heated skin, Bethany gathered her courage for an announcement she had been saving for the perfect moment. "I have news," she began, watching Yates's face closely. "Dr. Simmons confirmed it yesterday." His expression shifted from contentment to confusion, then to dawning comprehension as his gaze dropped to her still flat stomach. "Are you saying?" She nodded, suddenly shy despite their intimacy. "We're going to have a baby. In late November, if the doctor's calculations are correct." Joy transformed Yates's features, erasing years of hardship in an instant. "A baby," he repeated, voice filled with wonder. His large hand came to rest gently on her abdomen. "Our child." The wonder in his voice, the reverent way he touched her, eased any lingering anxiety Bethany had felt about his reaction. They had spoken of children in abstract terms, agreeing they both wanted a family eventually. But the reality of impending parenthood might have overwhelmed him, especially given his tendencies toward introspection and caution. Instead, he gathered her carefully into his arms, as if she had suddenly become fragile treasure. "I love you," he murmured against her hair. "Both of you." The ride back to town was filled with plans and dreams, additions to both the ranch house and the store's living quarters, discussions of names, playful debates about whether the child would inherit Bethany's love of books or Yates's affinity for the outdoors. "Why not both?" Bethany suggested as they approached Downieville. "Our child will have the best of all worlds, your strength and my determination, your practical skills and my education." Yates laughed, a sound of pure happiness that still thrilled Bethany whenever she heard it. "Poor kid won't have a moment's peace with us as parents." News of their expected child spread quickly through the small community, bringing a fresh wave of goodwill and support. Mothers offered advice and hand-sewn baby clothes. Men promised to help with the planned expansion of the ranch house, and even the most hardened miners seemed to soften when they saw Bethany in the store, especially as her condition became more visible. By late summer, the changes to their lives were well underway. The ranch house gained a proper nursery, bright with whitewashed walls and windows that caught the morning sun. The store's back room was converted into an office where Bethany could work while keeping an infant nearby. And Yates hired additional help for both properties, acknowledging that their responsibilities would soon expand in ways that would limit their previous flexibility. As Bethany's pregnancy progressed, bringing both the glow of anticipation and the discomforts of her changing body, Yates's protective instincts intensified. He insisted on riding with her between town and the ranch, arranged for Martha Chen's niece to help in the store during busy periods, and was known to check multiple times daily that Bethany was eating properly and resting adequately. "You're hovering, husband," she teased one October evening as he rearranged pillows behind her back for the third time in an hour. "Can't help it," he admitted sheepishly. "Never been more scared or more hopeful about anything in my life." His honesty, as always, disarmed her. "I'm scared too," she confessed, taking his hand and placing it where their child kicked vigorously. "But also certain that, between us, we can handle whatever comes." The early weeks of November, brought the first serious storms of the season, transforming the landscape into a monochromatic world of white and gray. Bethany, now in her final month of pregnancy, reluctantly agreed to remain in town rather than making the increasingly treacherous journey to the ranch. Yates divided his time even more carefully, never staying away overnight despite Martha's offer to keep Bethany company. "That child is stubborn like both its parents," Martha declared as she helped Bethany fold tiny garments one snowy afternoon. Waiting for the worst weather to decide to arrive, Bethany smiled, rubbing her distended abdomen where the baby performed what felt like acrobatics. "As long as he or she is healthy, they can arrive whenever they please." Martha's eyes twinkled. "You have feeling which it will be." "Yates is convinced it's a boy," Bethany replied. "Says he can tell by how I'm carrying, but I'm not certain." "Girl," Martha said with authority. "First child for couple who fight Halloran gang. Must be girl with warrior spirit." Whether Martha possessed genuine insight or merely lucky guessing, her prediction proved accurate 2 days later, when Bethany's labor began during a rare break in the storms. Yates, who had ridden to the ranch to check on the livestock after the heavy snowfall, returned to find Dr. Simmons already attending his wife, and the entire town seemingly holding its collective breath. The birth was difficult, but without serious complications. As dawn broke over the snow-covered mountains on November 17, 1854, Catherine Elizabeth Garrison announced her arrival with lusty cries that brought tears to her father's eyes and exhausted joy to her mother's face. "She's perfect," Yates whispered, cradling his daughter with hands that seemed impossibly large against her tiny form. The baby's wispy hair was dark like his, but her eyes, when they briefly opened, held the same clear intelligence that had first drawn him to Bethany. "She is," Bethany agreed, watching the transformation as this strong, sometimes intimidating man melted completely at the sight of his child. "Catherine for your mother," Yates nodded, too overcome for words. They had discussed names but made no final decisions, agreeing to wait until they met the child. Now, seeing his daughter, Bethany knew the name honored not just Yates's past, but the future they were building, a bridge between the family he had lost and the one they were creating. The weeks that followed were a blur of adjustment as they learned the rhythms of life with an infant. Catherine, quickly nicknamed Katie by her adoring father, proved to have a temperament that balanced her mother's determination with her father's steadiness. She cried when her needs were urgent, but could be soothed by the sound of Yates's deep voice, reading aloud, or Bethany's gentle singing. Christmas that year was modest in terms of gifts but rich with meaning. The store closed early, and they celebrated in the apartment above with Martha and Sheriff Miller as honorary grandparents. As Bethany nursed Katie before the fire, watching Yates and their friends exchange stories and laughter, she was struck by how completely her life had transformed in just over a year. "Happy?" Yates asked softly, noting her contemplative expression as he sat beside her. "More than I ever imagined possible," she replied honestly. "Though I do wonder sometimes what my father would think of all this." Yates considered her question seriously, as he did all matters concerning her feelings. "I think he'd be proud of how you've honored his legacy while creating your own. And I think he'd be pleased that you found a partner who recognizes your worth." His insight, as always, touched the heart of her thoughts. "I wish he could have known you, known Katie." "In a way, he made all this possible," Yates observed. "If he hadn't established the store, brought respect to the Nelson name in Downieville, you might never have come west. And if those outlaws hadn't attacked me on the road, you might never have come riding to my rescue," she added with a smile. Yates leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper meant only for her. "Best decision I ever made. following those gunshots. As 1854 gave way to 1855, Downieville settled into the rhythms of a maturing community. The wild excesses of the early gold rush days had moderated as families put down roots and businesses became established. Though mining remained the economic backbone, diversification had begun: farms in the valleys, logging operations on the slopes, and trading posts that served the increasingly settled population. For the Garrisons, the new year brought both challenges and rewards. The store flourished under Bethany's management, expanding its inventory to include not just necessities but small luxuries that reflected the town's growing prosperity. With Katie often nestled in a cradle behind the counter or carried in a sling across her mother's chest, Nelson's General Goods became as much a social center as a business, particularly for the growing number of women in the community. The ranch likewise prospered, despite the harsh winter. Yates's careful breeding program had produced a herd resistant to the mountain climate, and his reputation for fair dealing brought steady business from the stage companies and neighboring settlements. The rebuilt barn stood stronger than before, and the ranch house expanded now to include not just the nursery, but a proper library filled with books ordered from San Francisco, had become the home Bethany had once only dreamed of. By Katie's first birthday, their partnership had settled into complementary strengths. Bethany's education and business acumen balanced perfectly with Yates's practical knowledge and quiet authority. Together, they navigated the complexities of frontier life with a confidence that inspired others. Young couples sought their advice, business owners consulted them on decisions, and even Sheriff Miller occasionally asked their opinions on matters affecting the town's development. "Never thought I'd see the day when Yates Garrison became a pillar of the community," Miller remarked during a spring social in 1856. "Used to be the most solitary man in the county." Bethany smiled, watching as her husband demonstrated to a circle of children how to carve a simple whistle from a willow branch. Katie, now 18 months old and fiercely independent, clung to his leg while observing the proceedings with solemn attention. "He just needed the right reasons to engage," she replied. The sheriff followed her gaze. "You two make quite a team. Reminds folks that civilization isn't just about buildings and laws, it's about creating something worth protecting." The observation stayed with Bethany long after the social ended. As she and Yates walked home with a sleepy Katie between them, each holding one of her hands, she considered how their individual journeys had converged to create something neither could have built alone. "What's on your mind?" Yates asked, attuned as always to her moods. "You've been quiet since we left." Bethany glanced up at the stars emerging in the deepening blue of the mountain sky. "I was thinking about what Sheriff Miller said about us building something worth protecting. It made me realize how much larger our lives have become than I ever anticipated." Yates nodded thoughtfully. "Not just Katie, though she's miracle enough, but the store, the ranch, our place in this community." His free hand reached for Bethany's across their daughter's head. "None of it would exist without you. Or you," she countered. "You saved more than my life that day on the road, Yates. You saved my future." As their fingers intertwined, Katie looked up with the peculiar wisdom sometimes found in young children. "Mama and Papa hold hands," she declared with satisfaction. "Always, little one," Yates promised, swinging their daughter gently between them as they continued homeward, their shadows stretching long in the evening light, three figures moving in perfect harmony through a world they had helped to tame, but never diminish. The years that followed brought continued growth and occasional challenges to Downieville and to the Garrison family. A second child joined their family in 1858, a son they named Tyler Samuel, honoring both Yates's brother and Bethany's father. With his mother's chestnut hair and his father's quiet intensity, young Tyler perfectly complemented Katie's dark-haired exuberance. The community likewise evolved, weathering economic fluctuations as the easily accessible gold dwindled and more sophisticated mining operations took over. Nelson's General Goods adapted, becoming a supplier for the larger companies while maintaining its role as a gathering place and resource for families. The ranch expanded its operations to include breeding horses specifically suited for the mountainous terrain, building a reputation that extended throughout California and into Nevada territory. Through it all, the foundation remained solid, a partnership formed in that first desperate moment on the road, tested through danger and loss, and strengthened by shared purpose and enduring love. By 1863, with the Civil War raging in the East but California firmly Union, 10-year-old Katie had developed into a remarkable blend of frontier practicality and Eastern refinement. She could ride as well as any boy in the county, read at a level that impressed even the schoolteacher, and displayed a natural talent for mathematics that made her a valuable assistant in the store. 5-year-old Tyler, quieter but equally capable, showed an affinity for animals that suggested he might one day take over the ranching aspects of the family businesses. On a warm September evening of that year, as the family gathered on the porch of the ranch house after dinner, Bethany found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this peaceful moment. Yates sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders as they watched Katie teaching Tyler to identify constellations in the darkening sky. "You ever wonder how differently our lives might have unfolded?" she asked softly. "If those outlaws hadn't attacked me, or if you hadn't heard the shots?" Yates's hand tightened slightly on her shoulder. "Sometimes. But then I look at our children, at what we've built together, and can't imagine any other path." "Nor can I," she agreed, leaning into his familiar warmth. "Though I do wonder what became of those remaining Hallorans after they served their time." "Moved on to Arizona territory, last I heard," Yates replied. "Sheriff got word they've stayed clear of California since their release." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the children's excited voices as they spotted a shooting star. After a moment, Yates spoke again, his tone reflective. "You know, when Tyler, my brother, died, I thought that was the end of anything good in my life. Spent years just existing, not really living." His gaze moved from their children to Bethany's face. "Then I heard gunshots on a mountain road, and everything changed." Bethany reached up to touch his cheek, still moved by the depth of feeling this once solitary man could express. "For both of us." As twilight deepened into true night, they called the children inside for bedtime rituals, stories read in the library, prayers said beside small beds, kisses and promises for tomorrow's adventures. When the house was finally quiet, Bethany and Yates returned to the porch, drawn by the perfect clarity of the mountain night. "I've been thinking," Yates began, his arm once again around her shoulders. "The children are getting older. The businesses are stable. Maybe it's time for that trip to San Francisco you've been mentioning." Bethany looked up in surprise. Yates's attachment to the mountains was so profound that he rarely expressed interest in visiting cities. "Really? You'd want to go?" he nodded. "Been nearly 15 years since you came west. Might be nice for you to see some of that civilization you occasionally miss. Opera, proper bookshops, those art galleries you read about." The consideration behind his suggestion, recognizing and honoring a part of her that sometimes yearned for cultural experiences unavailable in Downieville, exemplified why their marriage had only strengthened with time. "I'd love that," she said warmly. though only if you promise not to be miserable among all those city folk." His low chuckle vibrated against her side. "Can't promise not to feel out of place, but I won't be miserable, not with you beside me." As they discussed potential timing for the journey, planning how to manage the store and ranch during their absence, Bethany marveled at how seamlessly they still worked together after all these years. The passionate young couple who had faced down danger had matured into partners who anticipated each other's thoughts, respected each other's differences, and still found joy in both grand adventures and quiet evenings like this one. When they finally retired to their bedroom, the familiar ritual of preparing for sleep held the same comfort it always had. Bethany brushed out her hair, now with occasional strands of silver among the brown, while Yates banked the fire for the night. When he came to stand behind her, their eyes met in the mirror, hers still bright with intelligence and curiosity, his creased at the corners from years of squinting against mountain sun, but no less intense in their focus. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" he asked, genuinely puzzled. "For hearing those gunshots, for riding toward danger instead of away from it, for everything that followed." Understanding dawned in his expression as he turned her to face him. "Best decision I ever made." He repeated the words he had spoken years ago, sealing them with a kiss that held all the tenderness of long familiarity and all the passion of enduring love. Outside their window, Downieville slept peacefully under star-filled skies, the rushing sound of the Yuba River a constant reminder of the forces that had shaped this land and the lives within it. The frontier that had once seemed so wild had been tamed not by conquering its nature, but by building communities that respected its power while creating spaces for human dreams to flourish. And within one such space, Bethany and Yates Garrison held each other close, their journey from desperate strangers on a dangerous road to partners in all things complete, yet continuing a testament to the enduring truth that sometimes the most profound love stories begin not with grand romantic gestures, but with simple courage in moments of crisis, and the choice to ride toward gunshots instead of away from them.